Hello everyone, welcome to our third Agora. Number three. Three is the charm, they say, so let's see what we can do this time. So like every time, we start at 7:30. That's a big lie. We always start like at around 35. Please make sure you have something to drink, something to eat if you want. The breakout rooms, I'm still listing the numbers, but just so you know, you can choose breakout rooms by yourself. So you know that number one is going to be teaching vocabulary and flashcard practices. Number two is going to be textbook plus creativity equals happy students. 3, recognizing and realizing JT-ALT relationships. And 4, design thinking in the ALT classroom. One thing that has changed from the previous sessions is that, so basically, this is kind of like how things move from now on. Number one, enjoy the event, basically now. Then second is we're going to send, for the people who have registered to our newsletter, we're going to send a newsletter, email with the feedback form, and also the link with the files, the Agora Drive, which is basically an online folder where presenters that can share their files, either like slides or anything else, they're going to put everything in there, and you can download and use it in order to study, review, whatever. Then around the 1st of May, or kind of like, because it's Golden Week, so it's holidays, need to figure out a few things, I'm going to send you a second message with the new program for May. And then you come and enjoy the event again. Okay, so this is all for me. And David, I'm going to pass you.
You're going to pass me?
Yep, I'm going to pass you. I'm going to pass you the lead.
Okay. Everybody, good evening. I'm really glad to see you all. I get the impression that extensive reading may be something that is more commonly done at the university level than at the school level. But that's just maybe my erroneous impression. Are people doing extensive reading at the school level as well? Good. Okay, so I'll crack on. So I'm going to run through some of the key points, characteristics of extensive reading, especially with regard to the issue of vocabulary development, which is something that I'm particularly interested in. So let me go from the beginning. Okay, so I'm going to give an overview, as I understand it, of the basics of extensive reading. So, this issue is that language learning requires a huge amount of input for language to develop to the level of confidence, but also this issue of automaticity. And that means the ability to scan through a text, read it, be able to absorb it, and read it automatically. So this means that ER should promote fluent reading, and it's not for the purpose of intensive reading, which is what a lot of teachers in classrooms tend to do. Not that that's bad, but in addition to that, there's a very clear need for a huge amount of independent reading. Well, the second point is the key aspect about extensive reading is that learners should do it off their own bat and from their own motivation. This means that teachers have a key role in providing guidance on good reading techniques, provide guidance so that learners gain a sense of empowerment and motivation and satisfaction from reading for pleasure and reading for understanding. You're reading something not to study English, you're reading something to enjoy reading it and to be an English user. So teachers might even act as a role model in seeking out simple Japanese text. On my Facebook page these days, I get Japanese extensive reading adverts, and I haven't bought any yet, but I get the impression they're probably quite good. So I'm suggesting that maybe teachers could act as a role model for their own Japanese reading. So teachers can explain how you go about learning to read Japanese at your own level for the aim of fluency and for the satisfaction that comes from that. Moreover, the willingness to read the same book is also really important. If you read the same book 2 or 3 times, you get more than 2 or 3 times the input. You're consolidating the input and you're embedding it even deeper, even more deeply in your second language system. So the third line there is about 200 words per minute, and this relates to the issue of fluency and automaticity. So an optimum speed for reading is about 200 words per minute, which is pretty fast actually. Not as fast as English native speakers who are, at our age, but it's still pretty good. And it is at this speed of reading that learners will be able to start gaining the amount of input that will encourage the development of this idea of implicit ability. So implicit is distinct from explicit. Explicit is what the teacher explains in a classroom. Implicit is when the language really takes on a life of its own in your mind, in your brain. And so you're able to start using the language without conscious attention, right? And this is what we're really talking about. So going back to the topic of silent reading, the second point there, the topic of silent reading, is that if you're reading out loud, that isn't fast enough to be absorbing the amount of language that you really need. So it's essential to develop the confidence and the eagerness to read at this speed, so as to be able to gather the necessary amount of input that is essential to develop this kind of English skill. My next point is about comfortable reading, not difficult. And this means that a natural language sense has moved beyond just the explicit sort of knowledge of English and the memorized knowledge of English for passing tests. Right, so teachers can also play a facilitating role in this, in helping learners to identify the books that are at the appropriate level for them. I think a lot of young learners think that the more difficult, the better, but that's not the case. In order to develop fluency and this emerging implicit ability, you need to be reading stuff that's easy to read or slightly more difficult, maybe I+1, so that you can start absorbing the language that is necessary for this development. So the key point is that eventually learners should come to be able to select texts that they want to read and that are good for them and which are truly extensive, not intensive in their nature. So that means reading that engages fluency development. Then, that means that the level of reading that learners are engaged in should be distinctly different from the usual textbook reading experience, which is not comfortable, right? And that means the intensive kind of learning. So the key point is customizing learners to see reading in a separate manner from their usual experience in the classroom. Yeah, so just be able to read something to enjoy the storyline, not to study English. Everybody, have you heard of Extensive Reading Central? Now, Extensive Reading Central is a free website, and this was created by this guy called, is that coming through? Can you see the book there? Rob Waring. Rob Waring lives in Hiroshima. He's been an absolute revelation in terms of English learning in all around the world. He started in Japan. I knew him 20 years ago. He was doing this, and he has totally revolutionized this idea of the importance of extensive reading. He made this website that's got hundreds of free texts to read. And there's a reading library. There's also a listening library. So this idea of extensive exposure is listening as well. There are listening rooms and vocabulary rooms. And there are all kinds of various levels. And have a look at this one. This is, you can select these kinds of texts, and this one is just really short and it's just really easy to read. And you can imagine a young kid beginning to read something independently like this and really learning to view English as a way to learn and enjoy the language as an English user rather than an English learner. Right? Short, easy to read, possibly motivating, hopefully motivating, but also developmental. Then, we learn language through encounters with words. So how many students do you know who have this, the notion that they've studied English, but they can't use it, right? So what we need to do is find the magic bullet, extensive listening and reading, that strengthens this emerging implicit skill. The real key point is that lots and lots of kids simply have inadequate exposure to reading. Think about when we were growing up with our native languages, if you are an English native speaker, through your childhood, tens of millions of words. Right? How many words are Japanese kids learning of English? Not even 1% of that, generally. Yeah. It's through this massive exposure that we develop English skill. Also, this is really interesting. This gets into kind of slightly technical stuff. The distribution of vocabulary is really disproportionate. The word "the" appears one time in every 17 words. How many words of English are there? Tens of thousands. The word "like" is a pretty common word, right? How often do you guess it appears in a text? Any ideas? What do you think, Nick?
Let's say 10.
415. Whoa. Yeah. And this is a common word, so when we start thinking about the more unusual words, you're having to go through tens of thousands of words before you re-encounter the word. And what I'm going to explain in a minute is how important re-encounters with words are, which is what extensive reading can provide. Right, so I'm going to give a little bit of a couple of minutes on word knowledge. Word knowledge is not black and white. Paul Nation, who is the co-author of this book with Rob Waring, absolute brilliance leader of English education. He came up with a highly influential model of vocabulary knowledge, right? And he said that vocabulary knowledge has 8 kinds of knowledge and separated into both receptive skill and productive skill. And this is it. On the left, the form knowledge of vocabulary, meaning knowledge of vocabulary, and use meaning of vocabulary. If you ever look at the form on the top left, I can send you this. You can take time to read it by yourself. I haven't got time to go through it now. But for example, for the spoken form of words, that's what the word sounds like when you hear it and how you pronounce it. And the written form of words, when you read a word, can you recognize it in a text? That's one kind of word knowledge. And do you know how to spell it? These are all forms of word knowledge, right? And then you've got meaning with all the different kinds of knowledge forms, right? Then you've got use at the end, and then you've got collocation, right? That's another kind of highly critical knowledge. The more you read, the more you encounter words in text, the more you know how the words fit together. Yeah. By the way, I'm going to show some research that I did on junior and senior high schools. This year, I'm doing a new research project. And if anyone is interested in joining in with some research on the development of collocation skill in school students, please contact me. Simple test, longitudinal, maybe do it once a year. Find out how that collocational knowledge develops. So collocations are what words or types of words occur with other words. Okay, I've just mentioned Rob Waring, and he did a really influential study back in 2003, and I'm just going to run through it really quickly. At what rate do learners learn and retain new vocabulary from a graded reader? Highly, highly cited piece of work, right? So what they did was to take a text, a simple text, and they replaced 25 of the words with fake words, right? And these look like English words. And then they asked a group of Japanese kids just to read it. The aim was to find out exactly how much reading goes on from a minimal amount of extensive reading. The key point here is that extensive reading has to be extensive, continuing, ongoing, right? So they gave 3 kinds of tests. You remember, just in that nation model, there's all these kinds of word knowledge. One kind of test was the word form recognition, what the word looks like. Have they seen it before? Translation from English to Japanese, and a simple multiple choice word meaning. Right? The results are really incredible. They gave these tests 1 week immediately after the reading, a week later, and 3 weeks, 3 months later. Right? And the results were that the words that appear more frequently in the text are better learned. Absolutely stands to reason. You need multiple encounters in text, right? So the words which appeared less frequently were less well learned. Stands to reason. But by not having those repeated encounters, the knowledge just disappears. Now, don't forget, these are new words. They think they're new English words, but they're actually fake English words. They used English words to rule out the possibility some of the subjects already knew those words, right? But they didn't keep them in memory, right? So words were learned well at first, about 40%. They just read the text. They gave them those 3 texts. Yeah, they know them. They can remember them. But they're fake words, right? So they never re-encounter them, obviously, right? This is the point. Only 1 of those 25 words is kept after 3 months. You think you've learned it from reading. If you don't re-encounter it, it just evaporates like steam, right? And right, the recognition on the left side of the 25 words, I made this graph from Rob Waring's paper. 25 words, right? The recognition, that means, yeah, I think I've seen it before, right? And it goes down a lot, right? After 3 months. But look at the right-hand side, whether they can say what that word meant in Japanese. 1 word in 25 only, because they simply never re-encounter the word. And that's why reading has to be extensive. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. This is a piece of research that I did a few years ago, right? And this is to do with the word form, the ability to read the words, right? And, you know, in the kind of research that I like doing, there's this idea that if you're really good at reading English words, you can notice them when they're stuck together in a chain, right? So that would be separated into boy, go, me. And if you're really good at reading English, you can do it really, really quickly. And I gave a whole long list of those to these students in junior high school and senior high school. But the key point is all these words are really, really easy words. Boy, go, me. Right? And there's, in addition to that, there's this letter contrast test, right? And there you have to divide the double letter. So you divide it on CC and HH. And the comparison of the words and the letters leads to this ability to measure word recognition skill, right? So I did this in a single school in Niigata, 608 students. I couldn't believe how lucky I was to get this data. And I also did it with students in Korea. That's interesting because Korean students have a writing system that's much more similar to alphabetic English than it is to Japanese hiragana. Right? And also did it with 12 native speakers of English. Right? These are the results. Right? So the green bar is the number of words. The silver one is the number of letters. And there's this sort of calculation that you make, and that gives you the yellow one, which shows how fluent you are at reading English, right? Along the bottom, you've got junior high school 1, 2, 3, senior high school 1, 2, 3, right? This is what happens. When you're 12 years old, right? The number of words that you can divide quickly is much lower than the number of letters, disfluent. And for that reason, the yellow bar is way down in the negative range. Junior high school, they're learning the basic words, right? This test is of basic words. Look at that. Starts making really good progress because they're learning those basic words first. But they don't do any extensive reading, right? They get into senior high school, they start reading those difficult texts. So by definition, those simple words aren't re-encountered sufficiently enough. Look what happens. Starts going back down. These are the simplest words of English. Look at that. And it stays where it is, right? The Korean students, those are university students, still at the basic level, the university students who are at the basic level. Then the university students who are at the advanced level, they're about less than half of the fluency on the simple words as native speakers. Look at this. Koreans, they've got the writing system a bit like English. And these are high school second years. Koreans have a massive advantage in English reading compared to Japanese. So overall, weaker reading efficiency of common words after the start of high school. And that would not happen if extensive reading were going on. This is why a lot of kids in this country learning English really struggle to learn how to read fluently with this so-called automaticity, right? Overall, you got to read. This is why extensive reading is so important. That's it.
Thank you. Round of applause.
How long did I take?